Has President Trump suffered from a stroke or some other neurological accident? Today we will analyze what information is available to us. So let's start with what we know. There were rumors swirling around that President Trump had passed away, but there are still concerns about the state of the president's brain and his neurological health in general. This is quite a big topic, so I might address this in a two-part video. The first thing I want to address is the possibility that the president had a stroke or some other neurological accident that would have temporarily incapacitated him, but may have long-lasting effects on his mental state. Now, what is a stroke? Most people have a general idea that a stroke is something that happens to someone's brain that results in that person being paralyzed, usually on one half of the body. Now, this is somewhat true, but there's so much more to this. A stroke is something in the medical profession referred to as a neurovascular accident. It's an accident that involves blood vessels and the nervous system, i.e. the brain. Now, a stroke takes place suddenly or very quickly as compared to something like, say, dementia that develops over several years. This is due to the fact that a stroke is caused by a disturbance in the blood supply to certain parts of the brain. Now, the brain, like any other organ, needs oxygen and energy to stay alive and function, and it is very sensitive to even a temporary loss of either of these. The oxygen and energy is brought to the brain by the blood through special blood vessels that supply the brain. Based on this, there are two main types of stroke. One is called an ischemic stroke and the other a hemorrhagic stroke. An ischemic stroke is when there's a blood clot which stops the blood from flowing in the blood vessels to the brain. And the other is called a hemorrhagic stroke, where there is a rupture in a blood vessel and this results in bleeding into the brain. This can be catastrophic and is usually more devastating than an ischemic stroke. Either way, when a part of the brain is affected by a stroke, there's death of the brain matter itself, and this will manifest itself in many different ways, paralysis being only one of them. Now, do we think that President Trump would have had a stroke last week? And is that why he went missing? So, what will we be looking for if we suspected a stroke in the president? Any weakness over one side of the body is one thing. He might not be able to lift one of his arms. His face might be droopy over one side. There might be changes in his gait or even inability to walk. There are many more symptoms as well, like personality changes, changes in speech like slurring or difficulty in communication, blurring of vision in one or both eyes. Now, these are all more typical of an ischemic type of stroke. If he had a hemorrhagic stroke or bleed into his brain, it could be more catastrophic. He might have lost consciousness completely or had seizures. Now, you might be wondering, even if he had a stroke, is it possible he recovered completely? And that is why we're seeing him out and about on Saturday. So there is one more type of stroke called a transient ischemic attack. Now, this is a stroke which resolves within 24 hours of onset of symptoms, and there's no permanent brain damage. It is also known as a mini-stroke. The blood supply is interrupted only temporarily. Now, is President Trump at risk for a stroke? There are some obvious risk factors that we know he has for sure. He's elderly. He is overweight. He doesn't exercise regularly as far as we know, and he has a very poor diet. Now, there are some factors that he might or might not have, as there are no recent heart scans or lab results, and the last ones seem a little too good to be true. It's difficult to be certain of the following. Is he diabetic? Given his diet, I would not be surprised. Does he have high blood pressure? Of course, this can be controlled with medication. Does he have high cholesterol? Again, he's on 2 cholesterol medications, so that might be under control as well. Now, here is what I'm suspicious about. There are some signs that he might be on blood thinners. You will know that this might be to protect against a stroke due to a cardiac arrhythmia. If he has a cardiac arrhythmia like atrial fibrillation or even other arrhythmias like atrial ectopy, multifocal atrial tachycardia, etc., he would be at risk of a stroke, as an abnormally beating heart causes blood to pool, and this causes blood clots. These blood clots wander all over the body, can end up in the brain, and cause a stroke. Now, you might be saying the blood thinners will protect him against these kind of clots and against having a stroke. So, it's a good thing he's on blood thinners, right? But now, here's the kicker. Being on blood thinners will put you at a higher risk of having a hemorrhagic stroke, especially if the president has had a fall and injures his head. A head injury, even as a small one, might cause a small bleed in the brain that would usually clot off. But if he was on blood thinners, it could bleed uncontrollably. Now, we know he's taking aspirin to help prevent heart attacks. The general public usually calls aspirin a blood thinner, but the medical profession refer to aspirin as an antiplatelet drug. It works in a different manner to other blood thinners. But regardless, aspirin will increase the risk of a brain bleed if the president has had a head injury. Now, in the elderly, of which President Trump is undoubtedly a member, one of the greatest dangers is accidental falls. Having falls over the age of 65 can be devastating. If he's on a blood thinner, he can definitely develop a brain bleed that will not stop bleeding easily. Not only brain bleeds, but sustaining hip fractures and other injuries can be life-threatening, reduce your life expectancy and quality of life. So why would he be taking blood thinners if there's a chance of sustaining a catastrophic brain bleed? In medicine, any intervention is based on risk versus benefit. If the benefit is thought to be more significant than the risk, we go ahead, but the risk still remains. So these are the things to look out for when you see President Trump on TV later on. Any weakness on one side, like using only one arm, his face being asymmetrical, especially when smiling, difficulty walking, slurred speech, any sign of a bruise or injury on his head, or if the White House comes out saying he's having tests like CT or MRI head, CT or MR cerebral angiogram, or carotid Doppler, they're most likely looking for a stroke, or he's already had a mini stroke. If they're saying he had a cerebral thrombectomy procedure, he's definitely had an ischemic stroke. If they say he's had thrombolysis, this might mean he had an ischemic stroke, but he might have also had what's called a pulmonary embolism, so blood clot in the lungs, and can be life-threatening. If they say he had a coiling procedure, it might indicate he had a brain aneurysm and a brain bleed. A brain bleed might also need surgery, but then this would be obvious. Funnily enough, when people think it's outrageous that the White House might be hiding something as serious as the president having a stroke, there has been a very famous leader who had multiple serious strokes and hid it from the public, proceeded to complete his term with no one the wiser. If you know who I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. Now, what is my personal take? I think he may have had a mini stroke or a TIA at best. He's back up and about as far as I can see, so could be just a temporary TIA. Maybe he's had a cardiac event like a minor heart attack. He does look a little rough and worn out, but this could be due to a non-critical illness as well. I couldn't see anything specific, so I'll reserve my opinion until I see more footage.